Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with co-host Mario Ramos Reyes. Our guest today is our good friend Christopher Zehnder, author and educator and convert. We'll begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of your faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you will renew the face of the earth. Let us pray, Lord. By the light of the Holy Spirit, you have taught the hearts of your faithful in the same Spirit. Help us to relish what is right and always rejoice in your consolation. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. A quick note before we return to, for a second week, the work of St. John Henry Newman. A quick note. I want to mention again Richard Garrity's introduction to Newman's Grammar of Assent. The book, Richard's fine book, a very easy to get into book, is available through our sponsor, En Route Books and Media. And Richard, remembering back, was on the very first episode and continued to be for many episodes. Should I call them episodes or should I call them something else? Episodes of The Open Door. He, in effect, opened the door for us. And he died not so long ago, and we hold his memory in our hearts. We've been working with Cardinal Newman off and on ever since Richard began with the Open Door. And we've generated, and it's easy to do that, 10 more questions on Newman. And the first 5 or so of them are initiated by Cardinal Muller, the former head of the Congregation of the Faith. And then the second 5 come from, I think, a remarkably vigorous and very clear and very provocative writer, Tracey Rowland, who's done a piece just a few weeks back on Newman for Catholic World Report. And it may even be, time permitting, which it not so often does, that we'll say a bit about Newman, the poet. Lots of people know something of his prayers and hymns, but he wrote a lengthy poem, The Dream of Gerontius, which Edgar Elgar famously put to music around 1900 or so. But let's begin with questions that really come from Cardinal Muller and really do focus on the the grammar of assent. At least the first few of them do. And I want to begin with this and see what Mario and see what Christopher have to say in putting together a response to it. Newman thinks, and he argues for this at length in A Grammar of Assent, that we can arrive at certainty in our assent to the historical revelation of God. Now, a quick interjection on assent. To assent to something, as Newman uses the term, and it's not idiosyncratic to him, to assent to something is to affirm it as the case, not simply to entertain it as a hypothesis, not to consider it from a detached distance, as it were, but to assent, to give one's wholehearted affirmation of it. So Newman, originally an evangelical Christian, steeped in Scripture, is as Catholics are, profoundly interested in the question of assenting to Scripture's revelation. And the question is, can we go beyond feeling positive about there being such a revelation? Can we go beyond taking it very seriously as something to be considered? Can we go beyond that sort of thing to assent to it with certainty? Gentlemen, what do you think?
Well, upon what is the basis upon which Cardinal Newman says that one is certain? Is it this kind of certainty that one derives from, say, study of history, which would not be a certain, it would have, of course, study of history is always a level of uncertainty because you're always basing what you say upon what other people have said and which you upon things which you cannot experience yourself or have not experienced yourself. Or is he talking about a certainty that is what we call the certainty of faith?
Well, I can give you an example that remains controversial to this day that he considers. Example number one, free trade is a good thing. He thinks that we can give notional assent to that proposition.
Right.
But he doesn't think that we can go beyond that. And he thinks that given that our assent is notional, it's not likely to be certain. And if we think it's certain, maybe we ought to think about it a little longer. On the other hand, and I'm thinking of Great Britain's partners in trade, free or not so free. If free, then certainly not fair with Ireland. Newman, in A Grammar of Assent, asks us to reflect on the proposition that Ireland is an island. Now, the proposition Ireland is an island is not like the proposition that Kant was very interested in. 7 plus 5 equals 12. 7 plus 5 equals 12, and unless we've switched number systems, we know that with certainty because in virtue of the very meaning of the terms, in this case numerical terms, 7, 5, and 12, and the relations plus and equal, well, we know that to be the case with certainty. It's a necessary proposition. Or if we're a little bit unsure that it's a necessary proposition, we could switch propositions and say something like all bachelors are unmarried. Then we're out of math and into something that's, well, reflective of the position of all bachelors, although many of them wish it weren't so reflective. But now Ireland is an island. That's a contingent proposition. A person could know the meaning of the proper name Ireland and know the meaning of the word is, although there are those who haven't, and know the meaning of the word island and know that Ireland is an island, but not know it because that proposition is a necessary proposition. It's a contingent proposition. It's true, but it happens to be true. Had geology worked its way in other ways, it wouldn't be the case. So Ireland is an island. Now, it seems to me, although this has nothing to do with Revelation, seems to me that that's a true proposition, and while I don't often entertain it, I'm perfectly happy to give my assent to it. And I'd even say I know it with certainty.
Mm-hmm.
What about that, Christopher? What's your take on Ireland is an island? I mean, maybe you want to switch it to Austria isn't. I don't know.
I mean, there's two things there. There's the fact that Ireland is an island as an accident of geology. There's also the statement Ireland is an island, which I assert, even though I've never been to Ireland. But it would be madness to say otherwise because so many people have said it, and it's been said for so very long, that one would have to be a misanthrope or a bit mad to deny it simply because he hasn't seen it himself, or to entertain a serious doubt of it.
What about the maps?
What about the math? Well, the math is
the math. The math.
The math, yeah. The mathematics, yeah.
What about those satellite pictures?
Well, the map. Okay. Yeah.
That helps too, doesn't it? Don't they all?
Well, it does help, yeah. But I used to do layout for the Flat Earth News, and this guy, who had that, he was denying the moon landings based on the fact that they faked the photographs. Who knows? But again, it's kind of the thing that only a madman would question, and it's very similar, I think, to other things in historical questions. Did Caesar cross the Rubicon, as it said he did, in the campaign against Rome? Well, one could say, well, that the historical bases for that it's all based upon sometimes partly eyewitness accounts, partly later accounts. But it's something I didn't experience, so if I were, very skeptical, I might say, well, I don't have to believe that, or I could doubt it. But yet, it seems to have a good enough authority that we can assert it to be true with a kind of certainty. Not the kind of certainty by which we assert that the square on the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the square on the legs. But it is a kind of certainty. It's a moral certainty, if you might say.
You'd actually compare and contrast it with Euclidean certainties, right?
Right. Which is what Aristotle says that we know a thing through its causes. And so
now, how about this?
Okay.
Suppose you've just recently moved, which means you maybe have a new parish. Or maybe you go to your old parish, but in either case, maybe your parish has an annual festival, and you get some raffle tickets at that annual festival, and voila, you win the first prize, and it's a trip for two to Ireland. And you go to Ireland, and while you're there, you wonder to yourself whether Ireland is really an island. So you get on a boat, you and Catherine, and you travel around Ireland in the boat. What do you say then? Are you up to the level of all triangles have three sides?
No, because you simply have affirmed the reality of it. You haven't affirmed. You don't see the reasons why reality is what it is. If those could be accessed, it's rather like this: if I draw a right-angled triangle and draw squares on the hypotenuse and the legs, and I measure those squares, I will find that the squares and the legs equal the square and the hypotenuse, right? And if I draw multiple triangles, I'll find that to be the case. So in that sense, I have a certain certainty based upon experience. Nevertheless, I don't have the same certainty that I would have, say, doing the first book of Euclid's Elements.
All right, now we got to get Mario into this. Mario, forget about Ireland. Forget about Ireland. I want to know. Mm-hmm. I want to know what's the story on Kansas being at some distance, some considerable distance from Paraguay. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
Are you certain that it's true?
Yes, it is.
Is it a contingent proposition or is it a necessary truth?
Contingent.
It's contingent. All right, now I want to use an example introduced by Richard Garrett. Both of you, please address this example. And we're going to get away from matters of geography. The Nazis committed genocide, or did their very best, in the Holocaust of the Jews. Or we could shorten that. There has been a Holocaust of Jews. The Holocaust actually happened. Holocaust deniers say it didn't. And I don't suppose that either of you have read Holocaust Deniers at length, have you?
No.
Are you going to? I mean, it would be quite the thing if it turned out that there never was a Holocaust. But you're not even going to bother, are you?
No.
Certainly not at length. So this isn't just a notional consideration that you have. You affirm, you give complete, real assent to the proposition the Holocaust occurred. Right?
Yes. Yes.
All right, now let's get back to Cardinal Muller. God became right. Oh, there's an umlaut there, but I just never gone into umlauts the way I should have.
You really should try them.
God became. We're serious now, as serious as we can be. God became incarnate in the man Jesus the Christ. Can we arrive at certainty and give our real assent to that proposition? Newman says, yes, we can. And Newman says that, in fact, as Catholics, we must, because the alternative is to say something like, it's highly probable that God became incarnate in the man Jesus Christ. Or, it's extremely highly probable that. But that's not what the Creed says. What we say is that this in case happened, and we give a real assent to it. Now, how is that possible if it's a contingent proposition? God didn't have to create the universe, and he did not have to become incarnate in the man Jesus Christ.
This is my view on generally on Newman and on the concept, if you will, of notional and then real assent. I was reading this morning a short essay by an Italian philosopher, which was complaining about some church leader today who, instead of affirming their own convictions, are stating certain proposition beginning with the term "it seems to me," instead of using more assertive "I believe." So his claim is, or his complaint is, that because the aggressiveness of pluralism and political correctness, etc., some clergymen are reluctant to assert with conviction what they really believe, and so that they introduce their own belief by asserting some uncertainty. And so they say, well, it seems to me that, etc., etc. And then they lay out what they are talking about, instead of say, I believe in a particular teaching of the church. So that they
they're really talking about themselves then, aren't they not?
Right.
It seems to me. Then they go on to say something about themselves, what seems to them to be the case.
Right. So that reminded me a little bit about Newman, which when he says, well, there is a difference between notional and real assent. And he was very moved, if you will, by mental acts, by the way that we know, etc., etc. So, however, at one point, he said, well, one can change one's mind, and that can be done, or might be done, on the basis of a single argument. Now, the question is whether changing one's mind on the basis of single argument is enough for me to have really a real assent. Because even a very coherent and cogent argument doesn't suffice to change one's life. Because it's not just a question of abstract thinking. It is more than that. We can raise the question and say, well, is this objection that is even a coherent argument, it doesn't suffice to change one's life? Is this something that rejects reason? We can raise the question. That may be a reasonable claim. But then you say, well, then how I can go about and show the real assent? Only through a concrete experience. In other words, how do I know if Paraguay is not the same of Kansas? Do I have this awareness just by reading the location in the map, reading history? Will that be only a notional knowledge or a notional assent? Or do I really need to travel and experience by myself? So in terms of Christianity, how do I know really that I believe in God and Christ is a present to me? By reading the catechism or by experiencing his presence in me? I think I would analyze this way of understanding reality by Newman in that way, or I understood in that way. Now, granted, you may say, well, then your experience about the presence of Christ in yourself may be is still subjective. So, but I think that is a way that I have been using in understanding him, which in some way is very close, even though it's not the same, as someone who was his contemporary, but he was not living in England. He was living in Denmark. Soren Kierkegaard.
Well, I'd like to introduce a distinction between personal experience, which it seems to me, sorry for that, which you are appealing to. After all, we've got your words recorded. I'd like to distinguish between personal experience and something that Newman calls the illative sense.
Sense, yes.
And Christopher has made some Aristotelian comments, and that connects us with Aristotle's term phronesis, a kind of practical reasoning. And Newman sees the illative sense as akin to phronesis, or perhaps an extension of phronesis. Phronesis in Aristotle is restricted to the moral life, really, whereas the illative sense in Newman can have as its object something, some proposition, say, that is not a moral command, but is something existential. Jesus Christ is God incarnate. And a worry, I think, would be that if Newman's claim that we can achieve certainty actually depends on a personal experience, although we certainly have a personal experience of our having achieved certainty, if it only depends on a personal experience, then we're not in a position to make universal claims. And that takes us to our second question. Cardinal M, I'll refer to him in shorthand, he won't object, points out that Christianity commits us to a universalism. And universalism is anything but subjectivism. And that the universalism that Christianity commits us to, or we commit ourselves to as Christians, that universalism is always going to be in tension with the state. Now, do we get the universal claims that the Church makes unless we have a certainty about those claims, and a certainty that rests on something other than personal experience? Although the personal experience that we have in giving notional assent might very well be as powerful as any experience that we ever have. Well, an analogy's always limp. My wife loves me as a contingent proposition, and I give real assent to that proposition. And I don't think that I came to give that real assent because of a personal experience. Mm-hmm. I think I came to give assent to that experience, that proposition rather, in a cognitive way, in an intellectual way. Everything stands for it, as Wittgenstein might say, and nothing stands against it. There are any number of arguments, but I don't look at any arguments in a singular way. I look at everything coming together to lead me to affirm, not inductively and not deductively either, to affirm because of an illative sense that indeed my wife loves me. I guess I raise this question because if faith comes ultimately to a personal experience and only a personal experience, how is it that my personal experience can in any way be universal?
Well, I think that one of the things, there's two ways of looking at this. First is if we're just dealing on the level of reason apart from grace, supernatural gift. I can look at the historical claims of the Christian faith. I can look at whether the claims of the Christian faith are reasonable, and I can come to a conclusion that it is reasonable, and there's good, for instance, good historical reasons for saying that Christ died on the cross and rose from the dead. What those tend to do is they remove obstacles to faith, but the actual, we look at, St. Thomas says that we are more certain of what we know by faith than we are than what we know by reason. And that's because
of the nature of the object of faith.
The nature of the object and the truthfulness of the object. But in order for us to acknowledge that, there has to be an elevation of our intellects. That elevation occurs, of course, through the supernatural gift of faith, which it's not based. We don't believe ultimately because of the historical cogency of the Gospels. We don't believe because of the reasonableness of the Catholic faith. Those are all kind of pre-grace. We believe because God has given us to believe, and we have that certainty. And it's an objective certainty because it's almost what it basically is. That we've been raised to a point that we see things at a higher level. So it's not a personal experience. Personal experience is obviously involved any more than my seeing an oak tree or my doing Euclid is a personal experience.
Well, could we say, Mario, just jump in any old time you want. Could we say this? Clearly, the faith that saves is an infused virtue. It's a theological virtue.
Exactly.
But the faith that saves, an infused virtue, is infused in a subject that has a capacity for such a faith. Capax Dei, the Latin, a capacity for receiving such faith. And we could only have a capacity for receiving such a faith if our reason is structured so as to be able to receive it. And it is the case that human reason, in that it has an illative sense, can give real assent to contingent propositions. You accept that the Holocaust occurred not because of the infused virtue of faith, but because you reasonably have come to give real, not just notional, assent to that. I give real and not just notional assent to the proposition that my wife loves me, not because of infused faith, but because of the bit by bit, over a period of time, realization that everything counts for that proposition and nothing really counts against it. Mario, please help us out.
Right. One of the things that I believe Newman brought into the reflection, I think, is an emphasis on the subject, emphasis on the believer. Now, you may say, well, that leads us to emphasis on personal experience. And I would say yes, but my yes is very qualified. Because on the one hand, yes, he talked about the ilative sense. He wants to defend practical reason. There's no question about that. From what he called the hegemony of abstract reason. Because when the individual comes to believe, yes, he confronts a set of propositions which may have come through tradition, or proposition which he confront and begin arguing, reflecting upon them, etc. And that is an essential part of his reflection. But in order to have a real assent to the notion of this truth, this abstract truth, is insufficient. He cannot recognize the true good just by reflecting on this proposition. Because the question for him, I think, is not abstract proposition, this abstract statement which will bring change to him. The change will come only when he say yes to those propositions, so that his heart will somehow fulfill his desire, and his will say yes, and put into recognize the good proposed by those propositions as true, and then he would act. So I think that is where the idea of personal experience comes. In other words, I have this proposal. Yes, my wife loved me. But then when I recognize the good of her love by concrete singular act, is what that changed me, and I'm really transformed. So in that sense, I understand the ilative sense, which is, of course, it's very close to what Aristotle called prudence. But there is a response. Now, how that is connected, we can connect with the church, the universalism of the church. When I was growing up and I was an activist, a Christian Democratic activist, there was a teacher of us, a very courageous man who was arrested 100 times, literally. And he used to say the following: the universalism of the church begin in the singular. When we say yes to the proposition that cross is present in our life. In the church, that locus is the parish. From the singular of the parish, we are open to the universality of the church. He said beautifully in Spanish, de la parroquia al mundo.
I have a question. I have a question concerning what you're saying. It seems to be what you would be saying, that the assent must lead to transformation. But is it not the case that even those who are, say, not in a state of grace still can assent to the propositions of the faith? I mean, in other words, that faith is not lost when one loses grace. Faith does remain. Even the devils believe and tremble. So the assent. Well, if we're going to narrow it down, the first step is the assent, which is going to be an act of the intellect, and whether that might transform one, or it might not. Well,
we need to make a distinction. Say, well, that is an acknowledgement. If the devil acknowledged Christ, which we read in the Gospel of Mark, he doesn't say yes. He acknowledged intellectually. Now,
yeah, I guess my question would be: isn't that what we're talking about when Newman's talking about when he talks about assent?
Well, I do believe this. Well, he talked about notional. When you have some idea of something, and you have your theoretical knowledge, is that sufficient in order to have a Christian experience? And I think he. Yeah.
No, I just said it's not sufficient in order to achieve sanctification, but I think it's sufficient for an assent.
You know, we're speaking in a way that has the subjective and the objective interweaving, and universalism and say nationalism contending. I'd like to move ahead a bit and see what follows from what Newman is saying about something that's been called liberalism, theological liberalism. When he came to be a cardinal late in life, he said that he'd been battling against liberalism for decades. And now I've got three more propositions here that I want to read. You have them before you, but our gentle listeners don't. And after I read these three propositions, I want us to address the question, what would Newman say about each of them? They're very familiar propositions. Here's the first. We all believe in the same God, so the church's teaching doesn't matter that much. We all believe in the same God, so the church's teaching does not matter that much. Here's another. Religion is a matter of feeling. So the majority of those who share the same sentiments should determine which way the church goes. Religion is a matter of feeling. So the majority of those who share the same sentiments, let's take a poll, determine which way the church should go. And the last of them. People who see themselves as spiritually united should be able to celebrate the Eucharist together. So now we're speaking of the sacraments. People who see themselves as spiritually united should be able to celebrate the Eucharist together. What would Newman say about such claims? They're not dogmatic claims, at least in the normal meaning of the term, are they? I know you're both biting your tongues.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was actually saying something, but I had it on mute.
Oh, well, that's a common mistake. My wife warned me not to make it before I started.
Some people like to keep me on mute.
She loves me, and so she warned me not to do that.
So you have evidence there. No, I was just reading what quoted Muller's article. Liberalism in religion is the doctrine that there is no positive truth in religion, but that one creed is as good as another.
Yeah.
That is the teaching which is gaining substance and force daily. Okay.
My mother used to say, no religion teaches you to be bad.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So all those statements you read are ultimately based upon the idea that there is no objective truth in religion. Religion is a matter of sentiment, it's a matter of feeling, and that being that whatever we say about religion is merely secondary. I guess it might serve some purpose. Like I remember years ago reading some theologians who were talking about the point of the doctrine of the church, they would say, is that it creates basis of unity. So that's the only real point of it, is that it's not a matter whether it's true or not. It's a matter whether we have to have something we confess together. So this is what we officially confess together, even if unofficially we dissent.
Kind of related to that is no dogma is a dogma unless it's accepted.
Right. So basically, you have
a dogmatic principle, and the dogmatic principle has to do with the truth of these propositions, and they are revealed by God, and we are saved insofar as we have the infused virtue of faith, but we are nonetheless intellectual beings, and because we are intellectual, we can receive such a virtue. We can have that, whereas I suspect that Newman would say, show me a robot, show me another one, show me the best robot you got, the best robot what you got. God cannot infuse the virtue of faith in that entity.
Right.
Because the robot, at the end of the day, it isn't a person. The robot has no internal source of unity. The robot is a fantastically complex collection of parts, but not an agent itself. Well, how about if we push ahead? And I don't want to do that unless Mario thinks it's okay. Mario, I know wants to talk about education. I know you want to talk about education. You always want to talk about education. And Newman certainly wanted to talk about education. And I'm just wondering, does the university, Newman wrote famous work, The Idea of the University. Does the university, serve first and foremost as a source of propositions to which we can give notional assent, or is the university, if not like our wives, at least like our mothers, is the university an alma mater, a loving mother, and as a loving mother gives us something more than collections of propositions to which we might or might not give notional assent? What say ye, Mario?
I would say not even that. I think the current university is not proposing to believe certain propositions, rather how we feel about certain propositions. In other words, what Newman says that, or he is against or opposed, the autonomous individual, for instance, or the individual without a family. Which come from his view of liberalism, which is characterized by the anti-dogmatic principle. You can see very well developed in contemporary university. So, in other words, you go there, if you are a teacher, you are going to propose a set of truth. Well, you shouldn't be saying that they are truth. They are claims. And so you show those claims to what extent those claims are reasonable. So what would be the proper response in order to have a safe place for the student to react to those propositions, how they feel about them? It's not just something that they have to react by grasping this notional assent, those claims, rather than how they feel about them, much less how they not only grasp and then make them part of their own personal experience. So that they can transform their own life or change their own mind, etc. So we are just in a...
You'd help them to clarify their feelings, though, wouldn't you?
Right. So that's the situation, I think. Sadly, at this point for a variety of reasons: the ideological context, the postmodern way of fragmenting reality, liquid modernity. You can name any label there. But we are far away from that idea of the university that Newman proposed.
And Christopher, when you write books for young students, how do you write them in terms of these questions?
Well, I mean, the point of the books, when I'm writing history, is the students can learn history and understand the times, the context of what's gone before. I wonder, I read The Idea of the University a while ago, so my memory of it is not great. But when I don't know if I'm writing it so that young people can be gentlemen and ladies. I think I'm writing primarily appealing to their mind. I sometimes think what it goes by the name of gentleman is probably best inculcated in them by their parents. So the question, like Rowland is quoted in this article you sent, that the university exists for the betterment of the souls of the students with a view to their spiritual welfare and their religious influence and usefulness. It almost sounds like what's being proposed here is a kind of finishing school rather than an institution the purpose of which is the pursuit of truth, primarily.
Well, I know that a lot of people have read The Idea of the University and have some sense of it, and they connect it with that idea of the Catholic gentleman, or let's say if we're at Oxford where Newman was just a gentleman. Here's a passage from Newman on the gentleman. Be patient. It's going to run 6 or 7 lines. A gentleman has his eyes on all his company. He is tender towards the bashful, gentle towards the distant, and merciful towards the absurd. He can recollect to whom he is speaking. He guards against unseasonable allusions or topics which may irritate. He is seldom prominent in conversation and never wearisome. He makes light of favors while he does them, and seems to be receiving when he is conferring. He never speaks of himself except when compelled. He has no ears for slander or gossip. From a long-sighted prudence, he observes the maxim that we should ever conduct ourselves towards our enemy as if he were one day to be our friend. He knows the weakness of human reason as well as its strength, its province, and its limits. That's a tall order, and I suppose, I don't suppose, I know that a taller order still would be a Catholic gentleman. And Tracey Rowland, in her essay, says this about a Catholic gentleman. A Catholic gentleman, she says, exists in a sacramental cosmos, and he has a sacramental imagination. He is therefore at home with paradoxes, mysteries, and analogies. He can think both deductively and synthetically. If someone were to suggest to him that they should spend their afternoon hunting orcs, he might respond with a line like, "Will you be carrying the ring, or are you giving that job to me?" But he wouldn't look baffled by the proposition. The Catholic gentleman is at home with symbols and metaphors and playful banter. Like St. Philip Neri, the Catholic gentleman understands the importance of music and picnics for the work of evangelization. Oh, that's very interesting. How about this line? Would you like to spend the afternoon hunting orcs?
Well,
will you going to be carrying the ring, or are you giving that job to me?
So you're describing, or Newman are describing what took place at the University of Kansas in 1974 up to 81 with the Integrated Humanities program led by John Senior and Dr. Quinn. So when you read the account of Dr. Quinn's famous project, who led many people into knowing themselves, into their own humanity, and then discovering Christ, and then some of them even discover their own vocation for religious life. When you read the account, how they propose this new way of looking at reality through wonder, that Dennis Quinn, a beautiful book on Iris Wonder. So they were not themselves professors of philosophy or theology. They were professors of literature. And through beauty, they got the student enthused into the beauty of nature. And so they not only examine some poetry or prose, but also they engage in dance, how to drink as a gentleman, how to be a very sustained farmer. So all these, what we may call practical tasks, which ultimately put them close or related to reality, so that they are not just creatures of abstract thinking rather than human experience. And that transformed the whole pedagogy, so much so that, again, some of them end up in discovering their own religious vocation, because ultimately all relationship to reality is a religious relationship. There is a religious sense. And that led, well, the whole story, that the whole program by powers that be was shut down.
Yes, the state of Kansas wasn't interested in the sacramental cosmos.
Exactly.
Now, Rowland also, this is very interesting, cites Leo Strauss, who is certainly a provocative thinker among provocative thinkers. And she says that for Strauss, the gentlemen are those who receive a liberal education, rendering them versatile enough to occupy all kinds of positions in public life. But philosophers are the pure academic types. And she goes on to say that for philosophers, the people who are really going to bear down, she recommends something she calls commando training. And commando training means, well, this would be an example of it. And I know someone who did this. You get yourself accepted in the University of California at Berkeley, and you get into the philosophy department, and you get yourself a doctoral advisor when you get to that point, a thesis advisor who is a well-known atheist, and you, guess what? How about this? You write your dissertation on the ontological argument, and it's so damn good that the atheist has to accept it and give you recommendations for jobs at secular universities. I know a fellow who did just that. But now, Rowland says, using Strauss's language, that this commando training is far too dangerous and violent and potentially career-destroying for those not built for a life of unremitting intellectual combat. She goes on to say, I think Newman would appreciate this distinction, and would be in favor of Catholic institutions training the ladies and gentlemen while at the same time seeing the value in sending the intensely intellectual, destined to be professional academic types into the fray at the elite non-Catholic institutions. But, this is sweet, as the kids say, but with the proviso that they are supported by a network of soundly Catholic mentors, including at least one Dominican. What do you think of that?
Well, it almost seems to say the Catholic university is only going to be, like I said before, finishing school, and the serious academic work is going to occur outside of universities. I think it's a strange thing to say.
Strange thing
whereas
to say.
Whereas the non-Catholic university is going to be an intellectual institution. I'm not quite sure why that.
I can see the problem there. Although having a absolutely first-rate research institution costs one hell of a lot of money and a lot more than that. And it's just not at all clear that Catholics in the United States are willing to support such institutions and require that they be Catholic. In my mind, the closest thing to that would be the University of Dallas. We come to the end of our hour, and I'm not forgetting the American Solidarity Party, and the only thing I can say is the American Solidarity Party, I think, has ladies and gentlemen in it. I hope so. But in terms of political life of the United States today, we also need to have some commandos in it, some people who will be willing to engage in, unremitting political combat. And, there's a transition that we can make from how we've ended up our discussion of Newman, transition that we can make back to the American Solidarity Party, and all sorts of themes connect with the work of the American Solidarity Party because it's trying to transform a whole society that's badly disordered. Let's end, as we ordinarily do, with the gospel from today's liturgy. This is from Luke chapter 12, verses 49 to 53. Jesus said to his disciples, "I have come to set the earth on fire, and how I wish it were already blazing. There is a baptism with which I must be baptized, and how great is my anguish until it is accomplished. Do you think that I have come to establish peace on the earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. A father will be divided against his son, and a son against his father, a mother against her daughter, and a daughter against her mother, a mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law." Gospel of the Lord. Come, Lord Jesus,
Praise
come.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.